A glass shattered against the hardwood floor, and for one frozen second, nobody in the bar moved. The huge man standing near the counter had whiskey dripping from his beard and down the front of his shirt. Across from him, a smiling police captain wiped liquor from his own hands like he'd just finished feeding an animal at a zoo. Everyone expected the big man to explode. Instead, he stayed calm. And that decision nearly destroyed his life. The first thing Elijah Brooks noticed that night was the music. Old blues rolled softly through Rosie Me's tavern while rain tapped against the windows outside. The place smelled like fried catfish, cheap cigars, and lemon cleaner. It sat on the corner of Jefferson and Pine in Montgomery, Alabama, tucked between a pawn shop and a barber shop that had been there longer than most marriages lasted. Elijah loved this place. At 53 years old, he had very few places left where he could breathe without feeling watched. Rosie Me's was one of them. He sat on his usual stool near the center of the bar, broad shoulders stretching against a dark gray sweater. Elijah had once been famous, not movie star famous, football famous. For 11 seasons, he had played offensive tackle in the NFL. 6'5", nearly 300 pounds during his playing days, a wall of muscle with hands big enough to palm a basketball like an orange. But age had softened him in the right ways. The body was still massive, but his eyes had changed. They carried patience now, kindness, the kind that only appeared after life had punched a man hard enough to sand down his ego. After football ended, Elijah came home. While former players chased television jobs and endorsement deals, Elijah used his savings to open the Brooks Youth Center on the east side of Montgomery. Nobody believed it would survive. 15 years later, it had become one of the most important places in the neighborhood. Kids came there after school instead of joining gangs. Single mothers dropped off sons who needed role models. Teenagers learned carpentry, mechanics, computer repair. Elijah wasn't rich anymore. But he mattered. And that meant more. Across the counter, Rosie Turner slid a fresh bourbon toward him. "You smiling like a man who finally caught a break," she said. Rosie was 62 and built like a woman who had spent her entire life carrying problems heavier than herself. Sharp tongue, warm heart, silver curls tucked beneath a red bandana. Elijah lifted the glass slightly. The grant came through. Rosie stopped wiping the counter. The full amount. 200,000. Her mouth dropped open. Lord have mercy. The man sitting beside Elijah let out a whistle. Daniel Harper had been Elijah's best friend for almost 20 years, retired history teacher, thin as a broomstick, white beard, constantly wore suspenders nobody asked him to wear. "Well," Daniel grinned, raising his beer, "look at Big Eli out here becoming a philanthropist." Elijah laughed. "Don't start using words you can't spell." The bar chuckled softly around them. It was a good night. The kind of night where hope felt possible again. Elijah talked about expanding the youth center, new tutoring programs, a basketball court renovation, maybe even scholarships. Then the front door opened. Cold air slid inside with 3 men. The energy changed instantly. Not loudly. Quietly. Like animals sensing a storm before humans notice clouds. The man leading the group wore plain clothes, but everyone recognized him immediately. Captain Richard Vance. Montgomery PD. Tall, thick-necked, mid-40s, hair clipped military short, the kind of face that looked permanently irritated by other people existing. 2 younger officers followed behind him, laughing at something he'd said. Vance scanned the room casually until his eyes landed on Elijah. Then he stopped smiling. Rosie noticed. So did Daniel. Elijah pretended not to. Vance and his officers sat near the far side of the counter. Rosie approached carefully. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey," Vance said. "Something expensive, department's paying." The younger officers laughed. Rosie didn't. She poured the drinks and moved away fast. For several minutes, nothing happened. The jukebox played softly. Rain hit the windows. A couple flirted near the pool table. Then Vance spoke loudly enough for the entire bar to hear. "They reinforced those stools special for you." The room quieted. Elijah stared at his bourbon. Vance continued. "Or they just pray the legs survive." One officer snorted into his drink. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Elijah remained silent. That seemed to irritate Vance even more. He stood and walked closer. "You're Elijah Brooks, right?" he asked. Elijah finally looked at him. "That's me. The youth center guy." "I suppose." Vance nodded slowly. "You're also the one who went before city council last month, talking about cutting police overtime funding." Elijah took a slow sip of bourbon. "I spoke about redirecting some money toward after-school programs. You called us overfunded. I called the neighborhood underfunded." The smile vanished from Vance's face. "You know," he said quietly, "my officers missed holidays working those shifts." Elijah nodded once. "And kids in my neighborhood missed fathers because nobody invested in them early enough." The silence grew heavier. Daniel whispered, "Maybe everybody just cool off." Vance ignored him. He picked up his whiskey glass. Then, without warning, he poured it directly over Elijah's head. Gasps exploded around the room. Amber liquid streamed down Elijah's forehead and soaked into his sweater. Nobody moved. Not Rosie. Not Daniel. Not even the officers beside Vance. Elijah sat completely still. That somehow made it worse. Vance expected anger. Instead, he got dignity. And cruel men hate dignity because it reminds them what they lack. Elijah slowly grabbed a napkin and wiped his eyes. "I'm asking you politely," he said calmly. "Step back." Vance leaned closer. "Or what?" Elijah didn't answer. Vance grabbed his collar with both fists and jerked him halfway off the stool. Daniel shot up instantly. "Hey!" Rosie shouted from behind the counter. One of the younger officers muttered nervously, "Captain." But Vance shoved Elijah hard against the bar. "Big tough guy," he sneered. Elijah raised one open hand. "A warning. A request. A final chance." Vance shoved him again. "Harder." That was when Elijah made a decision. Not out of rage. Out of certainty. He planted his feet and gave one controlled shove directly into Vance's chest. Nothing flashy. Nothing wild. Just raw force. Vance stumbled backward like he'd been hit by a truck. His legs tangled with a stool. Then he crashed onto the floor so hard the entire room shook. Glasses shattered. The bar froze. For one full second, Captain Richard Vance stared at the ceiling with complete disbelief on his face. Then someone clapped. Another person laughed. Suddenly half the bar erupted. Daniel nearly fell over cheering. Rosie slapped the counter and yelled, "About time somebody did." Vance's officers rushed forward. One helped him stand. The other pointed angrily at Elijah. "You assaulted a police officer." Elijah wiped whiskey from his beard. "He assaulted me first." Rosie suddenly walked around the bar holding a tablet. "And I got every second of it." The room went silent again. She turned the screen toward them. Security footage. Crystal clear. Time-stamped. The entire incident played back from beginning to end. Vance insulting Elijah. The drink. The grabbing, the shoving, Elijah trying to avoid violence. Everything. The younger officer's confidence disappeared immediately. Vance watched the video with dead eyes. Not embarrassed. Calculating. That scared Elijah more than anger would have. Because angry men act emotionally. Calculating men act strategically. Vance straightened his jacket. "You think this is over?" he asked quietly. Elijah met his stare. "I think you should leave." Vance looked around the room. Nobody supported him. Nobody looked afraid anymore. That humiliated him worse than the fall. Without another word, he walked out into the rain. His officers followed. The moment the door shut, the entire tavern exploded into noise again. Laughter. Applause. Relief. Rosie poured Elijah another bourbon. On the house. Daniel grinned. "Physics lesson," he said. "Big object meets bigger ego." Everyone laughed. Even Elijah. But later that night, while driving home through wet Montgomery streets, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Not fear. Instinct. Like something unfinished had followed him out of the bar. And he was right. The attack began before sunrise. Elijah woke to 12 missed calls. His son Marcus called again, while Elijah sat up in bed. "Dad," Marcus said immediately, "don't panic, but you need to get online right now." Marcus Brooks was 26 and halfway through law school in Atlanta. Smart, calm, methodical. He sounded none of those things now. Elijah opened Facebook first. Then Twitter. His stomach dropped. The Montgomery Police Association had posted a statement at 5:42 a.m. It described an unprovoked violent assault against decorated police captain Richard Vance by a large aggressive individual. Attached beneath the statement was a photograph. A single frame. Elijah's hand on Vance's chest during the shove. Nothing before it. Nothing after it. No whiskey. No grabbing. No assault. Just a massive black man appearing to attack a white police captain. The image was spreading fast. News stations grabbed it immediately. Comment sections exploded. Thug. Animal. Ex-athlete loses control. Marcus spoke quietly. "They planned this." Elijah felt cold. Not physically. Internally. Because Marcus was right. The statement had been ready too quickly. The image cropped too perfectly. This wasn't damage control. It was strategy. Elijah looked at the comments again and realized something terrifying. People believed it. Because people often believe the version they're handed first. Especially when authority hands it to them. By noon, things got worse. Vance officially filed felony assault charges. The detective assigned to investigate. One of Vance's closest friends. The assistant district attorney reviewing the case. Vance's brother-in-law. Elijah sat in his lawyer's office that afternoon while attorney Leonard Price explained everything with grim exhaustion. "They built a wall around him," Leonard said, "and now they're trying to bury you inside it." Marcus leaned forward. "What about Rosie's footage?" Leonard hesitated. "That's where things get dangerous." 2 days later, they learned exactly how dangerous. Vance's legal team filed a motion to suppress the security footage. Reason: improper surveillance signage placement. Rosie's security notice near the entrance was allegedly too high on the wall. 11 inches too high. 11 inches. That tiny technicality threatened to erase the only complete evidence proving Elijah acted in self-defense. Marcus nearly exploded. "That's insane." Leonard rubbed his temples. Insane doesn't mean ineffective. Judge Harold Benton would oversee the hearing, another longtime friend of Richard Vance. Everything connected. Everything protected him. The hearing happened Friday morning. Rosie texted Elijah afterward. "It doesn't look good." 3 words. That was enough. The same afternoon, Elijah's youth center board called an emergency meeting. The morality clause in the city grant had activated because of the felony charge. Funding suspended pending investigation. $200,000 frozen instantly. Programs would shut down within 30 days. Kids would lose tutors. Staff would lose jobs. The basketball league would collapse. 15 years of work balanced on the edge of a lie. That night, Elijah sat alone in his office staring at photographs covering the walls. Kids smiling. Graduations. Championships. Lives rebuilt. All threatened because one powerful man got embarrassed in public. Then came the phone call that hurt worst. "Daniel." His voice trembled. "They came to my house." Elijah straightened immediately. "Who?" "2 detectives." Daniel explained slowly. They arrived politely, asked routine questions, acted friendly, then casually mentioned an unresolved tax issue involving Daniel's late wife's estate. Nothing direct, nothing openly threatening, but the meaning was obvious. Cooperate or problems appear. Daniel's voice cracked. "I'm ashamed to admit this, Eli, but I'm scared." Elijah closed his eyes. That hurt more than the charges. Because good people shouldn't have to feel fear for telling the truth. Marcus documented every detail immediately. Witness intimidation. Federal territory. Then Marcus remembered something important. A journalist. Samantha Reed. Investigative reporter. Relentless. She'd spent years exposing misconduct in Alabama police departments. Marcus contacted her that night. She replied in 17 minutes. "Call me." Everything changed after that. Samantha arrived in Montgomery 2 days later. She wasn't flashy. No dramatic entrances. Just sharp eyes and a notebook filled with names. She listened carefully while Marcus laid out the connections. The detective friendship. The brother-in-law Ada. The judge. The cropped image. The intimidation. Then Marcus showed her 3 older complaints involving Vance. Each disturbingly similar. Provocation. Escalation. Counteraccusation. Protection. Samantha grew quieter with every page. Finally, she looked up. "He's done this before." "Yes," Marcus said. "And the system covered it." "Yes." She stared at Elijah. "You understand this story becomes national if I run it." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then run it." The article published Friday evening. By midnight, protests formed outside Montgomery Police Headquarters. By morning, national outlets picked it up. Pressure exploded. The district attorney's office announced they were reviewing newly surfaced concerns. The youth center board delayed permanent funding cancellation. For the first time in days, Elijah felt a tiny crack of hope. Then Monday morning destroyed it. Judge Benton ruled the tavern footage inadmissible. 11 inches. That was enough to erase the truth. The felony charges moved forward. Elijah was officially processed that afternoon. Mugshot. Fingerprints. Humiliation. Local news stations ran the image repeatedly. Former NFL star charged in assault case. No context. No truth. Just damage. That evening, the youth center officially lost its funding. Staff cried in the hallway. Kids overheard adults whispering. Parents panicked. And at 8 p.m., Richard Vance appeared on television, accepting a departmental commendation for professional conduct under difficult circumstances. Elijah turned the TV off, then sat alone in darkness for nearly an hour. Marcus found him there and saw something terrifying. His father looked tired, not physically, spiritually, like the weight of the system had finally pressed into his bones. That night Marcus barely slept. Instead, he kept replaying the original bar scene in his head. Then suddenly, his eyes opened. Phones. People had phones out that night. Birthday parties. Social media. Recordings. Rosie's security footage got suppressed because it belonged to the establishment. But personal cell phone videos. Different category entirely. Marcus drove to Rosie Me's tavern before sunrise. Rosie immediately remembered the birthday group sitting in the corner booth. Reservation under Tiffany. Marcus spent 4 straight hours searching social media. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Finally, he found her. Tiffany Reynolds. Birthday posts from that exact night at Rosie Me. Marcus messaged her immediately. Please read this carefully. 26 minutes later, she replied. I think I recorded something. Marcus nearly stopped breathing. They met that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Tiffany arrived carrying her phone like it contained explosives. I didn't know, she said softly. I swear I didn't know what was happening. Marcus nodded. Just show me. She opened her camera roll, pressed play, and suddenly the entire nightmare cracked open. The video began with birthday laughter, music, drinks, friends cheering. But in the background, perfectly visible, was Elijah. Then Vance approaching him. The insults, the whiskey, the grabbing, the shoving, the second shove. Every second. Clear, continuous, undeniable. Leonard Price watched the footage twice, then slowly leaned back in his chair. They can't suppress this. Marcus almost laughed from relief. Tiffany looked at Elijah. What do you need from me? Elijah stared at her for a moment, then smiled for the first time in days. Just the truth. That evening Marcus visited Daniel again. This time he brought the video. Daniel watched it silently, then watched it again. When it ended, tears stood in the old teacher's eyes. I knew what I saw, he whispered. He looked up. And I'm done being afraid. Daniel signed a formal statement detailing both the incident and the detective intimidation. Marcus immediately forwarded everything to Internal Affairs Lieutenant Vanessa Cole. Unlike most officers, Vanessa had quietly investigated Vance for years. She just never had enough public pressure to act. Now she did. She filed complaints with both Internal Affairs and the FBI Civil Rights Division that same night. Everything accelerated after that. The ADA recused himself by morning. Judge Benton quietly stepped away from the case. Federal investigators arrived in Montgomery. And Thursday morning, 300 people gathered outside the courthouse before sunrise. Elijah saw them from the car. Parents, students, former players, neighbors, pastors, teachers, people he'd helped years earlier, people he didn't even recognize, standing together in cold morning air because they refused to let him face the system alone. Daniel stood near the front. So did Rosie. So did Tiffany. Marcus looked at his father quietly. "You built this," he said. Elijah swallowed hard, then stepped out of the car. Applause spread instantly through the crowd. Not loud at first. Respectful. Powerful. Like people welcoming home a man who had survived something cruel. Inside the courtroom, everything felt different. New prosecutor. New judge. Federal observers seated quietly in the back row. Leonard submitted Tiffany's footage formally into evidence. The prosecutor reviewed it for less than 10 minutes before standing. "Your Honor," she announced, "the state moves to dismiss all charges against Elijah Brooks with prejudice." The courtroom froze. She continued, "Newly submitted evidence clearly establishes self-defense and directly contradicts prior claims made by the complaining party." The judge nodded. Motion granted. Then came 4 simple words. "Mr. Brooks, you are free to go." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. Just one breath. One tiny moment. Then he stood. Outside, the crowd erupted when he emerged. People cheered, cried, hugged each other. Marcus wrapped his arms around his father at the bottom of the courthouse stairs, while cameras flashed everywhere. Then suddenly the noise shifted, because another vehicle had arrived. Richard Vance stepped out wearing a dark suit and a confident expression. He clearly expected victory. Instead, Lieutenant Vanessa Cole approached him alongside 2 federal agents. She spoke quietly. Nobody heard the words, but everyone saw the handcuffs. The silence lasted less than a second. Then the crowd exploded louder than before. Vance looked stunned. Actually stunned. Like a man realizing for the first time that systems can fail him too. Federal charges hit by evening. Civil rights violations. Obstruction of justice. Witness intimidation conspiracy. Official misconduct. The police union deleted its original statement. Too late. Everyone had screenshots. The police chief publicly revoked Vance's commendation 24 hours after awarding it. 2 detectives involved in intimidating Daniel were suspended. The youth center's funding returned immediately. Then donations started pouring in. 50,000, 80,000, 100,000. By the end of the week, Elijah's center had gained more money than it originally lost. But that wasn't the best part. The best part came 9 days later. Rosie Me's Tavern. Same stool. Same bourbon. Different atmosphere. The place overflowed with people. Daniel sat near Elijah grinning like a proud grandfather. Tiffany laughed with friends near the jukebox. Samantha Reed finally relaxed enough to close her notebook for once. Marcus sat beside his father, quietly watching the room. Rosie brought out an expensive bottle she only used for moments that mattered. She poured Elijah a glass and placed it carefully in front of him. The tavern slowly grew quiet. Everyone looked toward Elijah. He stood slowly, held the bourbon up, and thought about everything. The whiskey poured over his head. The mugshot. The lies. The fear. The people who stood beside him anyway. Then he smiled softly. "They thought humiliation would sink me," he said. The room stayed silent. Elijah lifted the glass slightly higher. "But all they really did was show me who was willing to swim beside me." And this time, when the room exploded with applause, it sounded like justice.